They came pounding on my door at sunrise, dressed like cops, shouting that my wife was under arrest. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, convinced this was official. But what they didn't know, and what those fake inspectors were about to learn the hard way, was that my wife wasn't just another suburban homeowner. She was the sheriff of this county. And in that single morning, a petty HOA feud would explode into a full-blown war that tore the mask off a criminal empire hiding in plain sight. The first knock wasn't really a knock. It was a boom. A thunderous pounding that shook the glass panes in our front door so hard I thought they might shatter. My mug of coffee slipped from my hand and splashed across the counter as I froze, my heart stuttering in my chest. This wasn't the sound of a polite visitor or a delivery man. It was the sound you hear in crime shows right before the door is rammed off its hinges. Except this wasn't television. This was my porch, my home, my sanctuary, and someone was trying to break that illusion apart. "Open up, Daniel Hayes," a voice barked, sharp and commanding, echoing across the quiet cul-de-sac. "Your wife is under arrest." The words struck harder than the knock. Under arrest, my wife. My mind scrambled to make sense of it. We'd been awake all of 20 minutes. The sky was still painted with the pale blush of dawn. The street outside wrapped in sleepy calm. I was standing there in nothing but an old flannel robe and socks, coffee dripping onto the tile. For a moment, I thought I must be dreaming. But the pounding came again. Louder. Faster. I glanced toward the hallway just as my wife, Claire, stepped into view, tying her dark hair back into a neat ponytail. She wasn't rattled, not even a little. Her expression was cool, steady. The way I'd seen her handle tense moments before, though never anything like this. I crept to the front window and peeked through the narrow gap in the curtains. My stomach dropped. 4 men stood shoulder to shoulder on our porch. They wore dark navy shirts with block letters stenciled across the back in stark white HOA inspector. At first glance, the outfits looked like something out of a tactical unit cargo pants. Black boots, sunglasses even though the sun was barely up. But the fabric was cheap, polyester that caught the light in an odd shine. The holsters at their hips didn't match regulation gear. And then I recognized the one standing front and center, Gregory Malone, my neighbor, the man who had spent the past year making my life increasingly miserable. Greg stood tall, arms folded across his chest, a smug smile tugging at his mouth. Even behind his wraparound shades, I could feel the arrogance radiating from him. He loved this. He loved the show of power. I cracked the door just enough to keep the chain in place. "What the hell is this?" "Greg," I asked, my voice more brittle than I wanted it to be. "Step aside, Daniel," he said, tone heavy with false authority. "We've received reports of serious violations and potential security risks tied to your wife. She needs to come with us for questioning." "Questioning," my voice rose despite myself. By the HOA, one of the men behind him shifted uncomfortably. Another cast a nervous glance toward the street where curtains were twitching, neighbors roused by the commotion. Greg ignored them, tilting his head at me like a school principal scolding a child. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Behind me, Claire's footsteps approached, calm and measured. She stepped into the doorway beside me, dressed in her workout jacket and fitted black pants, posture straight and unflinching. Greg's smirk faltered for just a second. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You're coming with us now." Claire's reply was soft, but edged with steel. "Do you have a warrant?" Greg blinked. "What?" "A warrant," she repeated, tilting her head. "Search warrant, arrest warrant. Any kind of documentation signed by an actual judge." One of the so-called inspectors coughed into his fist, suppressing what might have been laughter. The others shifted their weight, visibly uncomfortable. Greg's jaw tightened, but his hand drifted to rest on the pistol at his hip. My stomach lurched because even though the weapon looked real, something about it was off. "I don't need a piece of paper to keep this neighborhood safe," Greg snapped. Claire didn't flinch. She simply locked eyes with him, her voice steady. "You're impersonating an officer, Greg, and that's a crime." The silence that followed was thick, the kind that makes your ears ring. Somewhere down the street, the faint click of a camera shutter broke the tension. Someone was photographing this circus. Greg leaned forward, sneering. You're making a mistake. No, Claire said coolly. The mistake is yours. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring, eyes narrowing just enough to signal that the time for games was over. She didn't raise her voice, didn't threaten. She simply turned to me and said, Daniel, call the sheriff's office. Ask for the duty sergeant. Tell them we have 4 armed men impersonating officers on our porch. My hand twitched toward my phone, but Greg's snarl stopped me cold. His lips peeled back, teeth bared in something halfway between a smile and a threat. You call anyone, and this gets ugly fast. The men behind him weren't so sure anymore. One glanced at his watch as if calculating how long it would take to walk away. Another shifted his clipboard nervously. The facade of authority was cracking. Greg, though, doubled down. We're not leaving without her. His fingers drummed against the grip of his pistol. Claire took a single step forward, her voice dropping to a tone I'd never heard before, calm, commanding, absolute. Greg, if you cross this threshold, you will be trespassing, and you will answer to the law, the real law. The power dynamic shifted in that instant. I felt it. The neighbors watching felt it. Even Greg's crew felt it, because whatever authority he thought he had evaporated in the face of someone who wasn't afraid of him. For a heartbeat, I thought he might do something reckless. His hand twitched near his holster, his body leaning forward, but one of the men behind him muttered something low, tugging at his sleeve. Greg froze, then straightened, his jaw working furiously. This isn't over, he spat, pointing a finger at Claire. Not by a long shot. Claire didn't blink. You're right, she said. It's not. And with that, Greg turned sharply on his heel, stalking off the porch with his faux inspectors trailing like chastened dogs. They disappeared into the rising sunlight, their boots crunching against the pavement, their little show of force unraveling in the daylight. I closed the door and slid the chain back in place, my hands shaking, my pulse still hammering. Claire remained by the window, eyes tracking them until they were gone. She looked calm, too calm. I swallowed hard, my voice cracking as I whispered, Who exactly are you? She didn't answer. Not yet. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, I already suspected the truth. Because no ordinary homeowner stands unflinching in the face of 4 armed men. No ordinary wife turns a fake arrest into a standoff she controls from start to finish. And that morning was only the beginning. If you had told me 2 years earlier that my quiet little dream of suburban life would turn into a nightmare, I would have laughed. At that time, all Claire and I wanted was peace. After a decade in the city, me working long hours as a civil engineer, her claiming to be a security consultant, we were exhausted. The noise, the traffic, the endless grind of deadlines had worn us down. We wanted something simple, predictable, safe. Oak Ridge Hollow seemed perfect. It was the kind of neighborhood you saw on postcards, tree-lined streets, neatly trimmed lawns, kids riding bikes until dusk, porch lights flicking on like fireflies at night. We found a 2-story Craftsman at the end of a cul-de-sac, with a big garage for my tools and a backyard where Claire could work out in peace. It felt like a fresh start, almost like a second honeymoon. In those early weeks, the neighbors welcomed us warmly. The Parkers next door brought over a casserole. The elderly woman down the block dropped off homemade cookies. And then there was Greg Malone, the man who would later stand on my porch pretending to be law enforcement. Back then, Greg seemed like the picture of a friendly neighbor. Mid-30s, tall and athletic, clean-cut hair and a ready smile. He introduced himself as both a police officer with the local department and the neighborhood safety chair for the HOA. I wasn't sure what that meant, but he said it with enough confidence that I assumed it was something official. Claire gave him one of her polite nods, the kind she used when she was filing away information but withholding judgment. Greg offered to help us get settled. He came over one afternoon to fix a leaking pipe in the garage, complimented Claire's landscaping in the backyard, even invited us to a weekend barbecue where he introduced us to everyone as the model couple. The way he spoke, you'd think he owned the block. But in those first months, his presence felt reassuring. The sight of his black and white cruiser parked in the driveway gave the street an added sense of security. Neighbors would often say how lucky we were to have a cop living among us. For a while, I believed them. We believed we had finally found peace. The first crack appeared about a year later. The wooden fence that bordered our property was falling apart, splintering boards, gaps wide enough for the neighbor's dog to squeeze through. Claire wanted more privacy for her work, and frankly, the old fence was an eyesore. I checked the city ordinances, hired a surveyor to mark the property line, and got the permits in order. Everything was above board. We contracted a crew to put up a 6-foot iron fence, elegant but sturdy. That's when Greg's friendliness evaporated. The day the contractors arrived, Greg stood in his yard with his arms crossed, watching like a hawk. His wife, Linda, suddenly seemed less sociable, rushing past us on her evening walks without a word. That evening, Greg came to our door. He wasn't wearing his police uniform, but a dark polo with a patch stitched over the chest, shaped like a badge, but not quite real. Close enough, though, to suggest authority. "Evening, Dan," he said with his usual forced smile. "I was wondering if you might consider lowering that fence to 4 feet. It's blocking my view of the street from my kitchen." I told him politely that the fence was within legal limits. City code allowed up to 8 feet, and we had full permits. Claire, standing just behind me, didn't say a word, but I could feel the heat of her attention like a spotlight. Greg's smile thinned. "I understand, but as a representative of the HOA, I think we should prioritize community harmony over individual preferences." It was the first time he invoked the HOA as if it were a weapon, not just a neighborhood committee. The way he said representative made it sound like he had power no one else did. I closed the door feeling uneasy, brushing it off as a neighbor with too much pride. But Claire looked at me, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "That man enjoys control." She said simply, "Be careful." I should have listened. Less than a week later, a heavy envelope arrived in our mailbox. It bore the embossed letterhead of a prestigious law firm. Inside was a notice claiming our fence violated community aesthetic standards, threatening fines of $500 per day if we didn't remove it. My stomach dropped. $500 a day. That kind of money would bleed us dry. I showed it to Claire while she was mid-workout in the backyard, sweat gleaming across her brow, her movements sharp and efficient. She scanned the page once and shook her head. "This is fake," she said flatly. "We're fully compliant with city law. They can't touch us." Her certainty steadied me a little, but I wasn't satisfied. I called the number listed on the letter. The receptionist on the other end sounded genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "but we have no record of your address, and we definitely didn't send any notice about a fence." When I emailed them a copy, she replied minutes later, "This is a forgery. Using our firm's name without authorization is a federal offense." I hung up, trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Someone had deliberately tried to intimidate us, and I didn't need to guess who. That night, Claire barely touched her dinner. She excused herself several times to take hushed phone calls outside, speaking in clipped phrases I couldn't quite catch. When I asked, she gave a tight smile. "Work," she said. Complicated. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to turn cold. The friendly waves vanished. Mrs. Patterson, the sweet older lady who once brought cookies, now avoided eye contact. Notes started appearing on our car windshield, under the front doormat, taped to the mailbox. Some were polite, "Please consider the community." Others were less so. "Outsiders don't understand how good neighborhoods operate." Claire collected every note, slid them into Ziploc bags, labeled and filed them in her office. She didn't rage, didn't panic. She just prepared. I, on the other hand, felt the unease growing heavier with every passing day. What began as a disagreement over a fence was becoming something darker, something orchestrated, and through it all, Greg Malone watched us. From his yard, from his cruiser, from behind those wrap-around sunglasses, the man who once shook my hand at a barbecue now looked at me like prey. I didn't know it then, but the fence wasn't the issue at all. It was just the excuse. The real battle, the one that would expose who my wife truly was, had only just begun. The forged letter should have been the peak of it. A sick little intimidation game. Nothing more. I told myself once we proved it was fake, Greg and his little circle would slink back into their homes and pretend nothing happened. But I was wrong. That letter was only the opening shot, the warning volley before the real siege began. Within days, the neighborhood's warmth cooled into something sharp and unfriendly. It wasn't obvious at first. A neighbor who usually waved while walking his dog suddenly looked the other way. Another couple, once eager to chat about home renovations, crossed the street when they saw us coming. At first, I chalked it up to coincidence. People get busy or people have bad days. But Claire was less charitable. "Someone's turning them against us," she said one evening, standing at the front window, arms folded. "This is coordinated." I wanted to argue, to say she was being paranoid, but then the notes started. They weren't shoved in our mailbox. Federal law made tampering with that risky. No, these were slipped under the windshield wipers of our car, tucked into the crack of our front door, taped to the fence posts, as if the paper itself was a form of protest. The first one was syrupy sweet. "We'd appreciate it if you'd work with the community. Lowering the fence would show you care about us all." The second was sharper. "This isn't how good neighborhoods operate. Outsiders don't belong here." By the fifth or sixth, the handwriting had changed, but the message stayed the same: comply or be cast out. I kept expecting Claire to crumble under the pressure, but she didn't. She gathered each note, placed it carefully in a plastic bag, wrote the date on the corner with a black marker, and filed it in a box in her office. No commentary, no frustration, just quiet, methodical record-keeping. I couldn't understand how she stayed so calm. I was unraveling. Walking outside felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone had been told I was the villain. Conversation stopped when I approached. Laughter died mid-sentence. Even kids, once quick to wave as they biked past, now pedaled faster, their parents watching from porches with narrowed eyes. Then came the incident with the HOA meeting. It was a Saturday afternoon when I stepped outside to grab the mail and saw Greg setting up folding chairs right on the strip of grass across from our house. He'd propped up a sign against one of the chairs: "Neighborhood Security Chairman, HOA Emergency Session." Curiosity, or maybe dread, kept me at the window as nearly 20 neighbors trickled in, some carrying clipboards, others with arms folded. Greg stood tall at the center, like a general preparing his troops. As you can see, he boomed, gesturing toward our half-finished iron fence. The Hayes family has chosen to ignore community standards. This isn't just about aesthetics. A fence this tall can hide suspicious activity. It compromises neighborhood safety. Murmurs spread through the group. A few nodded. Others exchanged uncertain glances. But then Greg went further. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial tone, though he projected loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've conducted my own background investigation. Claire Hayes doesn't just work in security consulting. Her job is classified. For all we know, we've welcomed a threat to national security into our neighborhood." I felt the blood drain from my face. At my side, Claire was motionless, her eyes fixed on Greg through the window. Her hands were relaxed at her sides, but her jaw was clenched, and I could see the storm gathering behind her calm expression. "He can't say that," I hissed. "That's defamation." "Oh, he can," Claire murmured, her voice low and controlled. But he just made the biggest mistake of his life. Something in the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't bravado. It was a promise. That night, Oak Ridge Hollow felt different. The easy laughter of kids playing tag on the sidewalks was gone. Porch lights burned, but fewer doors were open. People walked in tight clusters, whispering. We were no longer neighbors. We were suspects. The transformation in Greg was impossible to miss. He strutted through the cul-de-sac like a man with a badge, though none of it was real. Sometimes I'd catch him in his driveway, talking in hushed tones with other residents, clapping them on the shoulder like he was sealing deals. Every time I stepped outside, conversations ended. The notes continued, more forceful now. It would be better for everyone if you moved. Do the right thing before things get worse. Always unsigned, always anonymous. One morning, I found Claire already at the dining room table, a small black device in her hands. Motion-activated cameras. She said when she caught my look, night vision, audio recording. "Where did you even get those?" I asked, bewildered. She met my eyes evenly. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answer to." The silence between us was heavy, filled with the weight of truth she wasn't ready to share. I didn't push. Not then. Days blurred into nights, each one a little more tense than the last. Greg's influence spread, and our circle of allies shrank. What once felt like home now felt like occupied territory. And yet, through all of it, Claire remained unshaken. While I wrestled with anger and fear, she treated every note, every whisper, every hostile glance as another puzzle piece sliding into place. It was only later that I would understand why. She wasn't just enduring, she was building a case, because to her, this wasn't harassment. It was evidence. And when the moment came, she would use it to burn Greg's little empire to the ground. I didn't know it then. I just knew the isolation was eating me alive, and that the man across the street had declared war on us, with the entire neighborhood as his army. What I couldn't yet imagine was that Claire had already declared her own war quietly, strategically, and with weapons Greg couldn't possibly see coming. By the third week of hostility, the HOA notes no longer felt like whispers in the dark. They had become open threats. And with them came the midnight performances, Greg's version of inspections, designed not to enforce rules, but to terrorize. It started one Wednesday just after 9 p.m. when I heard voices outside, low and purposeful, not the casual chatter of neighbors. I parted the blinds and saw Greg standing with two men I didn't recognize. They were pointing toward our fence, their silhouettes sharp under the glow of the street lamp, nodding like conspirators. The pit of my stomach tightened. The next evening, there was a knock at the door, not the violent pounding of that first morning, but firm, calculated. When I opened it, Greg stood there in that same black polo with the fake badge patch stitched over his chest. His smile was polite in the way a knife is sharp meant to cut. "Evening, Dan," he said smoothly. "Just a reminder, this Saturday we'll be conducting neighborhood safety inspections. HOA protocol." I gripped the door tighter. "Is that an actual HOA policy?" I asked. "Or something you just made up?" Greg tilted his head, the smile never faltering. "I think you'll find it's in everyone's best interest to cooperate. Refusing inspection sends the wrong message." When I closed the door, my pulse was hammering. Claire was waiting in the living room, arms folded. "He's escalating," she said simply. That night, she scrolled through her phone with a furrowed brow, speaking in a low tone to someone I couldn't hear. When she hung up, I asked, "What happens if we refuse his inspection?" Claire met my gaze, steady and unflinching. "We let him come, but I'll be ready." I didn't understand what she meant until the inspection arrived early at 2 in the morning. The power cut first. Every house on the street blinked into darkness at once, the hum of air conditioners and refrigerators vanishing into a heavy, unnatural silence. Then came the crunch of boots on gravel, a low murmur of voices, the metallic click of our side gate latch being lifted. I jolted awake, adrenaline flooding me. Claire was already out of bed, fully dressed in dark athletic clothes, her posture straight, her movements calm, deliberate. "Stay here," she ordered. The tone wasn't a suggestion, it was command. But I followed anyway, creeping behind her as she descended the stairs. Greg's knock thundered against the front door, shaking it in its frame. "HOA inspection," he barked, loud enough to wake half the block. "Open up." Claire didn't rush. She moved like she was heading into a meeting she had already prepared for. Every step measured. She flipped on the porch light. Its yellow glow washed over the figures outside. 4 men, all dressed in navy shirts with HOA inspector plastered across their backs in white block letters. 2 had clipboards tucked under their arms. 1 gripped a flashlight like a baton. And Greg stood front and center, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his hip. Claire unlocked the deadbolt but kept the chain in place. Her voice was even, polite. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Greg's smirk widened. "We've had reports of unusual activity. HOA protocol says we inspect immediately when there's a potential security issue." At 2 in the morning, Claire asked, one eyebrow raised. "Some things can't wait." He leaned in slightly, his voice lowering. "Now, we can do this quick and easy, or show me the paperwork." Claire cut him off. Greg blinked. "Paperwork? Yes. Whatever authorizes you to be on my property at 2 a.m. Search warrant, inspection order, anything with a signature. One of the men behind him shuffled uncomfortably. Greg. Quiet. Greg snapped without looking back. He refocused on Claire. I don't need to show you anything. I'm law enforcement. This is my jurisdiction. Claire tilted her head slightly, almost curious. Your jurisdiction. That's right. Greg puffed up, shoulders squared. I've been keeping this neighborhood safe long before you moved in. And I don't need some, The porch light caught a subtle gleam on Claire's jacket collar, a small, silver badge-shaped pin. My breath caught. Greg's eyes flicked to it, then back to her face. You're on my property, Claire said evenly, in the middle of the night, without a warrant, armed, and impersonating an officer. That's a long list of felonies for you, Greg. For a long moment, no one moved. The tension was razor sharp. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Greg's jaw clenched. His fingers twitched near his pistol. I thought he might actually do it, cross that threshold, push inside. But then Claire's voice dropped, calm and deadly serious. Greg, if you take one more step, you'll be leaving here in the back of a real police cruiser. The other men exchanged uneasy glances. One stared at his shoes. Another glanced toward the street, as if calculating how fast he could slip away. Daniel, Claire said without looking at me, call the sheriff's office. Tell them we have 4 armed individuals impersonating inspectors on our porch. Ask for the duty sergeant. My hand shook as I fumbled for my phone, but Greg finally snapped. His face flushed crimson, lips curling into a snarl. You're making a mistake, Claire, he spat. No, she replied, her voice like ice. The mistake is yours. The silence stretched taut as wire. Then, at last, Greg jerked his chin at the others. Let's go. They peeled off the porch, boots crunching angrily down the driveway. At the end of the street, they melted into the shadows. A moment later, the power flickered back on, the hum of air conditioners and refrigerators returning like nothing had happened. I closed the door, my heart still slamming against my ribs. Claire remained at the window, her eyes locked on the street long after Greg had vanished. Finally, I found my voice. What the hell was that? Who are you? Claire didn't answer right away. She walked into the kitchen, set the kettle on the stove, and only when the water hissed to life did she turn back to me. You've been asking yourself questions about me for a while now, haven't you? She said quietly. Her tone wasn't accusatory. It was matter of fact. And in that moment, I knew the life I thought I understood, the quiet suburban dream, was about to unravel completely. Because my wife wasn't just a homeowner. She was something more. Much more. The kettle began to hiss, steam curling upward in a thin ribbon. Claire stood across from me, her hands resting on the counter, eyes locked onto mine with a calmness that both reassured and unsettled me. I was still shaking from the confrontation at the door, my chest tight, my robe clinging to me with sweat. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet again, but not in the comforting way it used to be. It was the silence of people holding their breath, waiting for the next explosion. Finally, Claire spoke. My name is Claire Hayes, she said, her voice steady, deliberate. And I'm the elected sheriff of this county. I stared at her, my brain scrambling to process what she had just said. Sheriff, not consultant, not security advisor, not the vague job title she'd always tossed around when people asked. Sheriff, you're serious, I stammered. Yes, she replied simply. 15 years in law enforcement, 10 in the sheriff's office. I was elected last year. She let the words hang in the air, waiting for me to catch up. I sank into a chair, my head spinning. Images of the past months flickered through my mind like puzzle pieces suddenly snapping together. The way she always chose the seat in a restaurant with a clear line of sight to the exits. The way she moved efficient, precise, like she'd been trained. The way she handled Greg tonight, never flinching, never backing down. All the clues had been there. I just hadn't wanted to see them. Why didn't you tell me? My voice cracked, part anger, part disbelief. She took a slow breath. Because when you hold this position, you make enemies. Not just petty neighbors like Greg. People with real resources, real grudges. If they knew where I lived, it could put you at risk. I wanted us to have a normal life here, but after tonight, normal is gone." The kettle whistled. She turned off the burner, poured steaming water into 2 mugs, and slid one across to me. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. "I had this running the whole time," she said. "Every word Greg said tonight is on here." I gawked at the device, realization dawning. She hadn't just stood her ground, she had been planning for this. She was documenting, building evidence. "What's his deal?" "Claire," I asked, my voice low. "Why go to these lengths? What does Greg really want?" Her eyes hardened. "Control. And maybe more than that. Men like him don't impersonate cops and stage midnight inspections because of a fence. He's testing boundaries, pushing people, setting himself up as an authority figure. And that means he's after something bigger." She pulled her laptop closer, her fingers flying across the keys. Within minutes, she had pulled up a state licensing database. "Look," she said, tilting the screen toward me. "No record of a Gregory Malone in law enforcement. Not here. Not anywhere in the state. Not even as a licensed security guard." My stomach dropped. "He's lying about everything I asked." "Not just lying," Claire corrected. "He's constructing an identity. And identities like his are usually part of a pattern." She dug deeper. Property records, court filings, employment databases. Her hands moved with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. Then she paused, her eyes narrowing. "Got him," she whispered. On the screen was a property deed. Greg's house wasn't under the name Malone at all. It was Gregory Miller. When she ran that name, the hits came fast. 3 prior arrests. Claire read aloud. 2 in Arizona for impersonating an officer. 1 in Nevada for harassment. Fired from multiple private security companies for abuse of authority. Civil suits for intimidation and false incident reports. I leaned back, stunned. And now he's here. In our neighborhood. Claire nodded slowly. He's been moving from state to state, reinventing himself. Starts out friendly, gains trust, then uses that to take control. And I'll bet he's done it through HOA boards before. Manufactured violations, intimidation, pushing families until they give up and move. Why, I asked. Why would anyone go to that trouble because there's money in it? She said grimly. And influence. If you can control a neighborhood, you can control property values, force sales, and flip houses for profit. And people like Greg don't act alone. There's usually someone higher up pulling the strings. The idea chilled me. Suddenly, our fence wasn't just a fence. It was leverage, a tool in a bigger scheme. Claire leaned back in her chair, her jaw set. Greg thinks he's in control, but he doesn't realize every stunt he pulls just gives me more evidence. He's going to overplay his hand. And when he does, I'll be ready. I sat there, clutching my mug, trying to absorb it all. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, wasn't just a homeowner caught in a feud. She was the sheriff of the county, running a covert counteroffensive against a fraud who had turned our neighborhood into his playground. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt the faint stirrings of confidence. Because if Greg had declared war, he had picked the wrong target. Claire took a sip of her tea, then gave me a small, dangerous smile. "Tomorrow," she said, "I start digging. And by the time I'm done, Greg Malone will wish he never heard my name." I believed her, because I finally understood who I was married to, and it terrified me almost as much as it reassured me. The next morning, I came downstairs expecting to see Claire sipping coffee, maybe trying to shake off the tension of the night before. Instead, she was already at the dining room table, laptop open, notepad covered in sharp, deliberate handwriting. She didn't even look up as I entered. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, scrolling through lines of data that might as well have been written in code. "Morning," I said, still groggy. Without looking away, she replied, "Greg Malone doesn't exist. At least, not on paper. But Gregory Miller does. And he's dirty." That woke me up faster than caffeine. I shuffled closer, peering over her shoulder. On the screen were records arrest reports, old employment files, and addresses stretching across Arizona and Nevada. She tapped the screen with one finger. 3 arrests, all for impersonating law enforcement. civil suits for intimidation, fired from multiple security companies. He moves every few years, reinvents himself, then worms his way into local HOAs. Always the same pattern, makes himself indispensable, then uses fear to gain control. My stomach turned. So what's he after here? Claire leaned back, eyes narrowing. Money, power, maybe both. But he's not working alone. I found connections to a man named Victor Haynes, real estate investor with a history of targeting military families. Buy low, flip high. Greg manufactures the pressure, Haynes profits. I rubbed my temples, and we're caught in the middle. She gave me a small, tight smile. No, we're not caught. We're bait. The word sent a chill down my spine. That afternoon, Claire retrieved 3 small black devices from a locked drawer in her office. Cameras, professional grade, motion activated, with night vision and audio capabilities. She handed one to me. We're installing these today. One in the maple tree out front, one under the eaves, and one inside near the door. I stared at the device in my hand. You just had these lying around. Her look said everything. Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. By nightfall, the cameras were live, their tiny red lights blinking. Claire tested the feed from her laptop, nodding with satisfaction as images from our front yard, driveway, and entryway appeared on the screen. Now we wait, she said. But waiting wasn't enough for her. The next morning, she crafted a message in the HOA group chat, a platform Greg had pushed on to every resident under the guise of neighborhood security updates. Claire rarely used it before, but now her words were calculated. Heads up, everyone. We've been asked to temporarily store some equipment for a county training exercise. Nothing to worry about, but a delivery truck may come late at night. Please don't be alarmed if you see activity in our driveway. That was it. No details, no explanation. Just enough to sound official and suspicious at the same time. Isn't that a little risky? I asked as she hit send. Her lips curved slightly. Risky is the point. Greg won't be able to resist. She was right. Within hours, one of the cameras captured Greg pacing the sidewalk across from our house, phone pressed to his ear, eyes locked on our driveway. That evening, Claire upped the ante. She created a fake training inventory list on her laptop, full of vague jargon about tactical equipment. Nothing classified, but enough to sound like something worth stealing. Then she left the document open on the screen, angled perfectly so it could be seen through the window. I raised an eyebrow. Now you're just putting on a show. Exactly, she said with a sly smile. People like Greg need a story to justify their actions. I'm giving him one. The next morning, the front yard camera caught him leaning against our window at sunrise, angling his phone to take photos of the laptop screen. Claire downloaded the footage, labeled it carefully, and filed it away. Step 1 complete, she said. That night, she made a call on a secure channel, introducing me to someone she only referred to as Rodriguez. His voice on speaker was low, steady, and full of authority. Your guy's definitely still active, Rodriguez confirmed. Goes by Miller, Malone, Mitchell, different states, different names. Works for Haynes. We've been trying to pin them down for years. If you can tie his impersonation stunts to Haynes's companies, we can move on federal charges. Claire's pen scratched across her notepad. Leave that to me. The next 2 days blurred with preparation. She drafted a fake memo addressed to herself from the County Tactical Training Division. It spoke vaguely of relocating a high-value asset for temporary storage. Then she printed it and left it in our unlocked mailbox. By nightfall, it was gone. The following morning, our driveway camera caught Greg meeting with a man in a silver SUV. They passed the paper back and forth, pointing toward our house. Claire zoomed in on the license plate, her jaw tightening. That's Haynes's car, she said. He's here. That evening, she dropped another post into the HOA chat. Reminder due to the upcoming training delivery. Please keep driveways clear. Arrival time is classified, but it will be within 72 hours, within 20 minutes. Greg was back in his driveway, phone glued to his ear. The camera caught him pacing, his voice audible on the recording. You sure it's worth something? All right, I'll take care of it. We'll get them out before the delivery date. Claire muted the clip and gave me a look that made my skin prickle. She had him. At dinner, I finally asked the question that had been gnawing at me. What happens if this blows back on us? If they figure out you're baiting them? She set her fork down, met my eyes, and said calmly, "Then we move to step 3. "And what's step 3? Her lips curved into a small, cold smile. "Public exposure. The kind you don't come back from." I didn't press further. I didn't want to know the details until it happened. But in that moment, I realized something important. Greg thought he was pulling us into his game. He thought he was tightening the noose. But the truth was far darker. Claire wasn't playing his game. She was rewriting the rules. And when the time came, Greg would discover he had been dancing on her stage all along. Saturday afternoon came hot and blinding, the kind of summer day when the air itself seemed to ripple above the asphalt. By 3 o'clock, folding chairs began to appear on the grassy strip in front of our house. Greg had delivered flyers 2 days earlier, emergency HOA gathering, community dispute resolution, and now nearly 30 neighbors filed in, carrying bottled water, fanning themselves with paper, whispering behind shaded hands. From inside our living room, I watched the crowd grow. My stomach twisted, but Claire remained composed, standing at the window with her arms crossed. She was dressed with intention, a black blazer over a pale blouse, hair tied neatly back, no badge visible, no gun, nothing to suggest the power she carried. She wanted to look like any other neighbor. For now, at exactly 4, Greg appeared. He strode down the street like a man preparing to deliver a sermon, navy polo pressed crisp, aviator sunglasses reflecting the crowd, and that fake badge clipped proudly to his chest. 2 of his inspectors flanked him, clipboards tucked under their arms like props in a bad stage play. "Thank you all for coming," Greg boomed, projecting his voice with practiced authority. "We are here today because certain residents have refused to comply with community standards. This is not personal. It is about protecting the safety and appearance of Oak Ridge Hollow." He gestured grandly toward our 6-foot iron fence as if unveiling evidence of a crime. This fence blocks sightlines from the street. It creates blind spots, potential cover for dangerous activity. In my professional opinion, it's a security hazard. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded. Others looked unconvinced but didn't speak. Greg stepped closer to the center, his voice dropping to that conspiratorial pitch he used when he wanted people leaning in. "And that is not all. I've conducted an investigation into our new neighbors. Claire Hayes is not who she claims to be. Her work is classified, her background obscured. For all we know, she poses a threat to national security, and I, as your neighborhood security chairman, cannot allow that threat to fester here." The crowd shifted uneasily. A few people gasped. One woman clasped her husband's arm. I felt my fists clench, but before I could move, Claire stepped outside. She didn't hurry. She didn't storm. She walked with measured calm, her presence drawing every eye. She stopped just a few feet from Greg, her voice cutting clean through his theatrics. "Before you go any further, Greg," she said, "I have one simple request." He blinked behind his sunglasses. "And what's that? Show us your police identification number." The effect was immediate. The crowd stirred, people glancing at one another. Greg let out a short laugh. "That's sensitive information. I can't just give it out in public." Claire's tone didn't change. "Every sworn officer in this county has a badge number. It's public record." "Providing it is routine." Greg's jaw tightened. "Like I said, I'm not obligated." Claire turned toward a folding table she had set up earlier. A laptop sat open, a projector casting its glow onto a portable screen. With a few clicks, she pulled up the county roster of active law enforcement officers. She scrolled deliberately, line by line, until the list reached the M's. "This," she said evenly, "is every officer currently serving in our county. As you can see, there is no Gregory Malone." The murmurs grew louder. Greg's composure wavered. Claire clicked again, and a new document appeared on the screen, a receipt from an online costume supplier. "And here," she continued, "is a purchase record for a fake police badge, shipped to 742 Elm Street, Greg's address 8 months ago." Gasps rippled through the chairs. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Greg's face flushed red. That's fabricated," he sputtered. Claire didn't raise her voice, but her next words cut like a blade. Is this fabricated too? She switched the screen to a still image from our driveway camera. Greg, at 5:37 on a phone in hand, leaning against our window, snapping photos of the stage training inventory on her laptop. Then, with another click, she played an audio clip. Greg's voice crackled through the speaker. "We'll get them out before the delivery date." The crowd erupted in overlapping questions, gasps, whispers, fragments of anger and disbelief. Greg's two inspectors looked at each other, pale, shifting uncomfortably. Greg lurched forward, pointing at Claire. "She's twisting this. You don't understand. She's dangerous." Claire raised one hand, steady and calm. "What we understand is that you've been impersonating an officer, trespassing on private property, and working with known real estate fraudsters to intimidate families. This isn't about offense. It's about control." For the first time, Greg's mask cracked completely. His voice rose to a shout. "You think you can make a fool out of me? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The shift was fast, too fast for most eyes to track. His hand dropped toward his hip, fingers curling around the grip of the pistol strapped to his belt. "Gun," someone screamed. Folding chairs scraped across the pavement as neighbors stumbled back, panicked cries filling the air. Greg yanked the weapon free, both hands gripping it, aiming square at Claire's chest. His voice trembled with rage. "Everyone shut up. Listen to me." But Claire didn't move. Her hand stayed visible, calm at her sides, her voice steady as stone. "Greg, you just made the worst mistake of your life." The words weren't a threat. They were a verdict. In the blink of an eye, she moved, a blur of precision, years of training compressed into 3 seconds of devastating efficiency. She sidestepped his line of fire, her left hand striking his wrist, her right hand clamping down on the barrel and shoving it skyward. The gun discharged once, the crack of it echoing through the cul-de-sac, the smell of gunpowder burning the air. Before anyone could scream again, Claire twisted the weapon from his grip, spun behind him, and hooked his arm into a lock that dropped him to his knees. In less than 3 seconds, Greg was face down on the grass, his wrists cinched behind him with a pair of black zip ties pulled from Claire's blazer pocket. Silence fell over the crowd. Neighbors who had once feared her now stared in stunned awe. And then, slowly, someone began to clap. It spread hesitant at first, then building into applause that broke the tension like a dam giving way. Greg thrashed, spitting curses. "You think this is over? You have no idea how deep this goes?" Claire's knee pressed firmly between his shoulder blades. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. "Gregory Miller, also known as Malone, you are under arrest for impersonating an officer, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, and conspiracy to commit fraud." Every phone in the crowd was raised now, capturing the moment. His downfall wasn't just witnessed. It was recorded, undeniable. And as the deputies' sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, I realized something with a chill that went bone deep. Greg's last words weren't just rage. They were a warning. This fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sirens arrived within minutes, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off every window on the cul-de-sac. Neighbors parted like waves as 2 sheriff cruisers screeched to a stop, doors flying open, deputies storming out with weapons drawn. For a heartbeat, the whole neighborhood looked like the climax of a crime drama, except it was real. And my wife was the one holding the villain down. Claire didn't flinch. She calmly disarmed Greg, cleared the chamber of the pistol, and handed it grip first to a deputy. "Weapon is secure," she said in that clipped, professional tone I had never heard from her at home but recognized instantly as law enforcement command presence. Detective Maria Santos, a compact woman with sharp eyes, stepped forward. She took one look at Greg red-faced, zip-tied, spitting curses, and then at Claire. "He's been on our radar for months. You just handed us the probable cause we needed." Greg was hauled to his feet, wrists still bound, and shoved toward the back of the cruiser. He didn't fight, but his glare was poisonous. Before they loaded him in, he twisted his head toward Claire. "You were targeted long before you moved here," he hissed. "When they send someone else, it won't be me you're dealing with." Claire didn't blink, but I saw the flicker in her eyes, the way her jaw tightened. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. The deputies pulled away, the neighborhood buzzing with nervous chatter. Neighbors who had avoided us for weeks now swarmed, some thanking Claire, others gushing in disbelief. A few even apologized for doubting us. Claire nodded politely, but her face stayed unreadable. When the crowd thinned, she turned to me. "It's not over." I wanted to argue, to believe that Greg in cuffs meant we had won. But deep down, I knew she was right. That night, our dining table became a war room. Claire spread out files, property records, and screenshots she had pulled from county databases. She sketched a flowchart in clean, precise lines, Greg at the center, arrows linking him to shell companies, false HOA citations, intimidation tactics. At the far end of the chart was a name I didn't recognize, Victor Haynes. "This is how it works," she explained. "Greg identifies a target family, military, law enforcement, or anyone with stable property. He manufactures violations, pressures them until they break. Then Haynes swoops in with a shell company, buys the house cheap, flips it for profit, rinse and repeat." My skin prickled as I followed the arrows. "How many times have they done this?" "We know of at least 40 families in 6 states, Claire said grimly. "But it could be double." The thought hollowed me out. This wasn't just about us. It wasn't even just about Oak Ridge Hollow. It was bigger, national. By morning, the task force arrived. Captain Rodriguez, a tall man with silver at his temples, shook Claire's hand with the familiarity of someone who had stood beside her in worse battles. "You've just made our month," he said. "We've been chasing Miller across state lines for 3 years. Now, with your footage and that takedown in front of 30 witnesses, we've got him. For the next 48 hours, Oak Ridge Hollow was swarmed with agents." Warrants were served at Greg's house and 2 nearby properties tied to Haynes's companies. I stood on the sidewalk watching as boxes of files, hard drives, and even duffel bags stuffed with fake police gear were hauled out. One detective showed Claire a tablet filled with notes Greg had kept on us, daily schedules, income, even where our friends lived. "This isn't intimidation," Claire muttered. "It's intelligence gathering." Meanwhile, the 2 inspectors who had fled the HOA meeting were picked up in the next county. Both were former security contractors with minor criminal records, easy pawns for Haynes. Faced with the evidence, they flipped fast, pointing straight to him as the mastermind. 2 days later, Haynes himself was arrested in Nevada, stepping off a private jet. National news picked up the story. Cameras swarmed our street, dubbing it the HOA sting. Anchors painted Claire as the unflinching sheriff who outsmarted a fake cop ring. Through it all, she remained professional, offering only one statement: no one, no matter their title or uniform, has the right to intimidate a community for personal gain. If something feels wrong, speak up. That's how neighborhoods stay safe. It wasn't fiery, but it struck a chord. Weeks later, Oak Ridge Hollow felt different. The sharp tension that had infected every sidewalk and driveway was gone. People waved again. Kids played outside. The HOA board reformed under transparent rules, rotating leadership, open records, and one unshakable bylaw: no one could hold a security-related position without verified credentials. Claire declined nominations to the board. Real leadership, she told them, is about empowering people, not holding power over them. The line earned her a standing ovation, later printed on flyers for the first Unity Day barbecue. Still, the shadow lingered. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Claire sipped her tea while watching kids race their bikes around the cul-de-sac. I asked, "Do you regret showing them who you are?" She took a long breath, eyes drifting toward the horizon. Sometimes secrets are protection, but sometimes truth is the safest thing you can give people. Her words settled heavy in my chest. That night, I found her at the kitchen table long after midnight, lit only by her laptop's glow. She wasn't researching Greg anymore. She was scrolling through a spreadsheet of names and addresses across the country. When I asked, she smiled faintly, just keeping track. A week later, we received a postcard with no return address. On the front, a quiet suburban street in Virginia. On the back, only one sentence: "You stopped one of them." There are more. Claire didn't show the neighbors. She simply filed it in her locked desk drawer and placed a call to Rodriguez on a secure line. Our neighbors believed the storm had passed, but Claire and I both knew better. The battle in Oak Ridge Hollow was over. But the war the one Greg had hinted at with his final words was still out there, waiting. And as I watched her that night, calm, steady, unyielding, I realized something chilling but comforting all at once. They had chosen the wrong house and the wrong woman to test. Stories like ours prove a truth that often gets forgotten. Real power isn't in intimidation, it's in resilience. Greg and his backers relied on fear, secrecy, and the silence of communities too scared to fight back. But when one person stands firm, others find their courage. Claire didn't just defend our home. She exposed a network that preyed on trust. And maybe that's the lesson here when someone tries to scare you into compliance. Document everything. Stand tall. Seek truth, because fear only wins if we let it. If this story struck you, let me know your thoughts below. Have you ever faced intimidation in your own neighborhood? How did you respond? Comment your story. And don't forget to subscribe, because the fight for justice, even in the quietest suburbs, is far from over.